Would you like to tell us your name?
It's Jean Austin.
When were you born?
The 5th of April 1935
And where were you born?
in Islington, North London.
Can you remember what life was like before the war?
Not terribly, because I was only a toddler, really, yeah. But it was a happy family life, yeah. Used to do lots of nice things and go out and, with family and with my sisters. And my brother wasn't born until 1940, So I was only sort of 5 years old when war broke out, yeah.
How did life change during the war?
Oh, terribly, really. Not in the beginning, because they were fun times and happy times.
Yeah.
But during the war, when you were that age, 5 years old, you didn't really know what it meant and what would be forthcoming. But as time went by, it got more frightening, and you began to wonder what was going to happen as a child. Yeah.
What did your mum and dad do during the war as a job?
Well, my mum didn't work at the time, like most mothers. They were stay-at-home mothers but my dad, he was a wood machinist and carpenter. But when war came, he wasn't allowed. Well, he couldn't go into the army or the air force or any of the forces, because as a child he'd sustained a leg injury. So therefore he went into what was called war work. So he worked for de Havillands, which used to help make the Spitfires and the other planes at that time.
What was rationing like?
Oh, well, rationing as a child, I mean, we all had to have rationing books, and you only got sort of one egg for each person, or a rasher of bacon, but that's why we're still called a nation of queuers, because during the war you had to queue up for everything with your ration books. You never got, much meat, but corned beef, tins of corned beef was the most prolific sort of food that you used to have. Corned beef and mash, or corned beef fritters and that, and but very, very sparse. And with children these days, they can just go into a sweet shop and get what they like. We used to have ration books, and you only got sweets available when the shops had them in, and they used to be called tuck shops, really. And unless you had your ration book to get stamped, you wouldn't be allowed to. You couldn't get any sweets. So everything was rationed. So food was quite sparse. But you used to get lots of vegetables, but families made up, lots of different things with what was available at that time. That's as far as I can remember in that respect, until I was evacuated, as a young child, yeah.
What school did you go to?
I went to Highgate School in North London, in North Hill, near Highgate Village. Yeah. But during the war, of course, there wasn't much schooling, because a lot of families and children were evacuated. But fortunately, I wasn't evacuated on my own. My sister was in the WAFs, my eldest sister. My second sister, she stayed in London with my dad. But my brother was born in 1940, and so Mum took us off, and we went to see a billeting officer, and we were first billeted in Welwyn Garden City, and then from there we went on to stay with my aunt in Swindon in Wiltshire, and then we went to see another billeting officer. Well, my mum did, and and we went to South Marston Manor, which is in Wiltshire, and stayed in this big, magnificent manor house, and we lived in the servants, which was the servants' quarters, and it was we were treated very well there. There was a Miss Brenda, a Miss Joan, a Miss Maggie, and the colonel or the major, and he had this big trophy room in the manor house, where there was African shields and spears, and because he was I think he had been a bit of a hunter in his time, and I went to a little village school there, but as a youngster, being only as young as I was, 5 when war broke out, I can't remember a terrible lot, but I remember when I used to walk up the lane to the little village school. There was an airfield nearby, and when some of the planes used to come in, the odd pilot used to give us a little wave as they came in, or they waved their wings from side to side to sort of say hello, sort of thing, you know.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting. So it wasn't so frightening then. It was quite living in the village and in the manor house, and of course although they had stables, there was no horses there at the time, but we had they had beehives and they had orchards, so we did get some, little luxury foods. And when my mum used to go with my brother up to London to see my dad and my second sister, I used to stay with the cook and gardener in their little cottage until she came back. But the most frightening time was when we moved back to London, because my mum was missing my dad and my brother was a baby, and so my sister was in the West and my second sister was working in London, because there's quite a distance in our ages, and so we moved back to London, and that's when the most frightening times began. Yeah.
So, apart from rationing and the evacuating, what other precautions did you take during the war?
Well, that was basically it. Apart from we used to sleep down the underground. That was the Woodman underground in Highgate, and we were allocated like what they call bunk beds these days. When we first went down there, people were just sleeping on the platforms, but the trains used to stop early, early evening, and then start again at 6 o'clock in the morning. But when you were allocated the bunk beds, that was good, but a lot of people used to just sleep on the platform because of the air raids. And I remember we used to come up early in the morning, round about 5 o'clock or 5:30, carrying blankets, walking up, and in the winter when it was freezing cold and there'd be red skies when you got up from the fires in main part of London, and also shrapnel from the guns all over the ground, and you didn't know whether you were going to see your house when you got to it, and you'd go into a freezing cold house because there was no central heating in them days until the fire was lit, and the skies used to be red from the, as I say, from the burning fires in London. And but you just have to carry on, and you'd have your gas mask in your little box with the string over, and often, and the searchlights, you'd see the searchlights searching for any enemy planes, and the big barrage balloons, which used to be fascinated when they used to go up because they were like big fish or whales in the sky, and but people just carried on with life as they could. I mean, there was blackout, so that there was no street lighting, and they used to paint big white lines round the trees so that you didn't bump into them. And they used to have people called air raid wardens, ARP they were called, and they used to go around making sure that people's curtains were drawn or the blinds were pulled down, otherwise they'd shout out to you, put that light out, and then we had, which we call fog now, it used to be smog, and it used to be absolutely, when it was smog, black, and you didn't hardly know where you were walking. But as I say, you just carry on like that. And I remember my sister, she was in the WAFs, but then she met her husband, who was her husband, and she came out of the WAFs, got married, and her wedding dress was made of parachute silk from the parachutes. And then she became pregnant, but her husband then got posted to Burma for 3 years. And I also had 2 uncles who were prisoner of war. But as I say, you just sort of carried on with life as best you could. There was frightening times, and sometimes during the day when there was bombings and that, or air raids, I used to hide under the cupboard, under the stairs. And even today, when we get thunderstorms, it brings back memories of the raids during the war. And I remember my nana and granddad, who had a lovely house in Islington, and their house was bombed to the ground. Fortunately, nobody was in it at the time, and by a V2 rocket. But the most frightening bombs really were what they called the doodle bugs, and they used to come over like drones and go, and then they'd stop, and they were like black small planes really. And of course, when they stopped, there was this swooshing noise, and then there'd be an explosion, but you didn't know where they were going to drop. And then there were the incendiary bombs, which were like flame bombs that used to set light to buildings, and they were the frightening. It was frightening at times, but then there was happy times. But there was a lot of good community spirit among people. People used to look out for one another and be kind to one another and care about one another, because you never knew from one day to the next what was going to happen. But then my sister was expecting my niece, and the air raid wardens, because she stayed at our house, and the air raid wardens used to come along and put her on a stretcher when she had the baby, and my mum used to carry the baby in the Moses basket, and we used to, when there was a siren and a warning, we used to go down to the shelter under the school playground and stay down there until the raid was over. But you never knew when the raids were coming. You just heard the sirens and knew that there was a raid on the way, and your tummy used to go over. And sometimes, if it was of a night time, you'd lay in bed and you'd start to shake because you were frightened of what was, in case your house, a bomb was coming down on your house, But as I say, that went on for almost like 5 years. But you just, in the beginning, it was more frightening than it was towards the end, because you gradually got used to what was happening, Yeah.
What was your first experience of the Blitz?
Well, just like I said, it was just the air raid warnings and hearing about the bombings, because you didn't have television in that in those days. You just got what was on the radio, on the news, and what was happening. So apart from that, you didn't actually, like, you get television now to know what what was happening, like it is now in you know, in the Ukraine and everywhere else. You just had the BBC, like the news, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
What shelter did you have in your home?
I had in the garden, we had an Anderson shelter. It was like a corrugated shelter, but you couldn't really stay in that because it was full of sort of spiders, or it used to get wet. But our neighbours next door, they had what was called, I think it's a Morrison shelter, and it was like a big iron table that you could go um, go under for protection. But we didn't actually have one in our house. But you did have some people, like my gran. They had like a brick built shelter in the garden, which naturally went when their house was completely gone, because that road doesn't. Yeah, that was Bryan Street, 18 Bryan Street, Islington, and just off the Caledonian Road, and that was where I was born. And then I remember my dad took me down one day, and it was completely gone, and all you could see was the top of the shelter, and the whole road was. It doesn't exist anymore because the rockets had hit that hit that road. But fortunately, as I said, nobody was in the house at the time, so that was lucky
Yeah.
for us, you know.
What was your favourite meal during the war when rations were around?
Well, I can't remember a lot of what we had. We had plenty of stewed vegetables because people used to grow their own vegetables in plots in the garden. But apart from that, I suppose I used to like corned beef, and I still like. I still like corned beef. Yeah, corned beef and mashed potato with pickle on the top. Yeah. I mean, and sausages, but sausages weren't like the lovely sausages that you get now or that you got before the war. They were sort of. They used to say that they were black sausages because, I mean, people used to have, believe it or not, there used to be horse meat and whale meat. People used to eat because there was no, you know, not a lot of, as far as I can remember, because I was so young, there wasn't a lot of real meat about. I mean, the queues used to be a mile long when the butcher did have meat, and then you were rationed to a certain amount, to the amount of people in your family. You know, that's why you only got one egg each, or a rasher of bacon each, or you know, whatever was going, and you just used to queue and queue, you know, for that. Yeah, I remember going with my around with my mum, queuing up to get things. I used to go to the sweet shop though and take the ration book and get some sweets when they were available, you know. But and my favourite, when there was chocolate at that time, my favourite chocolate was Aero chocolate. But we still had rationing when I was first married in the 50s, 1950. We still had rationing up to then. It was, I think, in the middle of the 50s when rationing actually finished, you know, so it did still go on quite a long time after the war. But when I was in Swindon, we used to go into the main town of Swindon, and then I used to be from South Marston Manor, which where I said we stayed, and they were lovely to us in there, and we used to have to go across the fields with the cows, and I know I used to be frightened of the cows, but there was a big American influence then. That was when the Americans came into the war after Pearl Harbor, and there was a lot of them stationed in Swindon in Wiltshire, and they used to give us chewing gum, and they used to give us lifesavers, which look like the polo mints do today, fruit ones, you know. So yeah, so we did get little treats near and then, you know. But Christmas is where you'd still get a Christmas present, but people used to have pianos in their houses in those days. We always had a piano, and people, neighbours or family, where possible, we used to get together and have a sing-song round the piano, and bring some sort of happiness into what was going on. You know. Yeah.
At the end of the war, what was it like when Sir Winston Churchill announced it was VE Day?
Well, in V-Day we had they had we had street parties, so all the trestle tables were put out, and we all had flags, and everybody made, you know, cakes and sandwiches, and everybody was dancing in the streets and that. So it was lovely, sort of after the war, but it took some time to get back. I'm hesitating a bit because, being, you know, nearly 89 now, it's hard to remember everything, but I'm not too bad at remembering a lot of things that I've said, you know. Yeah. Is that all right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's
No, that's brilliant.